He was a brilliant mimic, I remember, in the old BBC days.
Oh, they're very clever, very clever. I mean, Ernie was the classic one, isn't it?
Ben used to write all his own material, and he was a wonderful compere, kept the thing moving, because it was live, remember?
We all live our lives very much on the edge of tears, don't we? Because there's always some tragedy waiting around the corner, or there's unemployment, or there's ill health. It's very easy to make someone cry, but to make someone laugh is a real skill.
He was a true, wonderful person. Nobody could have been more down to earth. We were fortunate to know him personally. I mean, Michael Jackson went to see Benny, but Benny came to see us.
The sound of shoppers looking for an elusive bargain in Eastleigh's Market Street, a road that was at one time the workplace for a man who would go on to become a worldwide superstar. I'm Richard Latto, and welcome to the South Salutes Benny Hill. This is a celebration of one of the most famous residents ever to be part of life here on the South Coast. 2009 would have been Benny Hill's 85th birthday, and the quest to get him the memorial he deserves in his home city is ongoing. Over the next hour on BBC Radio Solent, we'll hear from Benny's colleagues in the world of show business, personal friends whose stories have never been told before, and, thanks to permission from his estate, clips of Benny from his many appearances on the radio. In fact, right now, let's go back to 1959, a year that a young Benny was a guest on Desert Island Discs, hosted by Roy Plumley.
Benny, what part of England do you come from?
Southampton.
What gave you your first interest in the theatre? Do you remember?
It was probably Christmas days. Stood up in the corner with funny hats on, making mum, dad and aunties and uncles laugh with little impersonations of film stars and Ned Sparks and Gordon Ark and all that lot.
Benny never forgot his roots in the South and always spoke fondly about his time in the city. Here he is in 1991 on Radio 1's Steve Wright in the Afternoon.
Then when I was about 12, I joined a local concert party called Bobby's Concert Party in Southampton, right. And we used to do the working men's clubs on a Sunday night.
Nightmare.
And they used to say to me, what do you want, son? Half a crown or a ride home in a taxi? So I used to take the half crown and come home on the tram. And that's how I really started.
Right.
And then when I was about 16, I was a milkman. First of all, I worked for Woolworths for about 6 months.
Yeah.
Me and 24 girls and a little old manager.
Oh, that must have been a drag.
That was lovely.
That's where you got the idea, right?
I learnt a lot. And then I went on the milk round for about 6 months. But at that time, I was doing semi-pro dance band work, and I used to play guitar, drums, and vocals. Terrible vocals.
No, you play guitar?
Know that you got me loving you. Stuff like that.
The late Dennis Kirkland, director and producer for Thames Television.
Ben wanted to become a comedian, but his dad used to take him to the Variety Theatre in Southampton, and he saw a sort of folder rolls type show, which was like sketches, and there was the funny fat comic, and he was always surrounded by beautiful girls, and everybody laughed and everybody clapped for him, and he said, I want to be like him. I want lovely girls all around me and everybody clapping and laughing at me, and that's really what set him on the road to it.
Through the making of this programme, I've met many people with some lovely stories of their friendship with Benny. Mary Knight is one lady that met him before he became an international superstar.
Well, the first time I met him was at the Polygon Hotel when Benny was not a famous person, but just on the first rung of the ladder. My husband helped put his makeup on and chatting away, and he introduced me to Benny, and we had just become engaged, and he gave his congratulations and looked at me and said, I approve, which was very flattering and very nice. Then we saw him at the Grand Theatre, where he wasn't top of the bill. It was a lady who was it was a cartoon character. Her name was Jane. And Benny was sort of the second in line, and he did a Romeo and Juliet takeoff, really, where he had a ladder with steps both sides, and he would go up as Romeo on one side, then come down again with a wig on as Juliet, and that was quite hilarious. But we still didn't imagine that he would become the famous person that he did. That was just the very, very beginning, when he was just starting out and getting used to audience, and that was very memorable. And then we saw him on the London stage, and we went backstage to have a chat because he wanted to see us, and that was very interesting. And we enjoyed that because he was then becoming a big name.
Mary's late husband Norman was good friends with Benny.
They were evacuated together, having been to Taunton School. But in 1939, he was in the accommodation opposite to my husband, and Norman used to watch Benny going off with his guitar over his shoulder. And though they were going to school, they would meet up and have lots of fun and conversations. And Norman never imagined, of course, that he would one day be the famous person that he turned out to be.
We'll hear more of Mary's story later. Now let's have another clip from the BBC archives, again from Desert Island Discs in 1959, this time with Benny talking about an area in the south that would go on to provide inspiration for one of his best-known characters.
You could hear the offbeats pound as they raced across the ground.
My first ever romance, the biggest I think I've ever had. I was 12 and she was 14, and I saw this lovely girl in a green coat and dark brown hair on a merry-go-round at an Eastleigh fairground, which is about 6 miles from Southampton, during a September carnival week. I was staying with my uncle and aunt, and I fell like mad for this girl. And I asked my cousin Chris, all about her, and he explained, where she lives and everything. And he said that every lunchtime she used to take her father's lunch into his shop in Market Street in Eastleigh. Well, of course, I had to go back to school, but the next Christmas holiday that came up, the very first day of the holiday, I said, well, Mum, I think I'll go out for a walk today. And she said, you'll be all right, wrap up warm and eat some sandwiches, And I said, I'll be out all day, on a nice long walk, keep me fit. And I walked all the way into Eastleigh, stood at the end of Market Street, watched this girl go into the shop with her father's lunch, come out of the shop with the empties, and go away. And that was I'd finish my sandwiches and go home. And that was my day made, and I did that day after day, right through the holidays. 6 miles there, 6 miles back, rain, shine, hailstorm, snow, a lot.
And you never spoke to her?
No, I didn't. And at the end of the holiday, I went back to school, and I don't know whether I forgot her. I think my dad bought me a football or something. It took me my right off,
Growing up as a child in Hampshire, he attended Taunton School, today known as Taunton's College. I caught up with the current headmistress and asked her if she had been aware of the connection between her school and Benny.
No, I wasn't. I knew that he'd been, a celebrity in the area because knowing Eastleigh quite well, I was aware that, there's a Benny Hill close in Eastleigh, and I knew the connection with, Ernie the Milkman song and Eastleigh being a milkman in Eastleigh. But I hadn't realised that he was a Taunton's College boy. He was actually an old Tauntonian, and so it was only really when I came here as principal that I picked up on the fact that right outside my office window is the Benny Hill Garden, which, and it's interesting as well, I suppose it might interest you to know that I was actually a pupil at the girls' grammar school, which was on this site. So, Benny, 30 years before me, was, at Richard Taunton's Grammar School, which was then over the other side of the Common in Highfield. And then when the two colleges merged, this site took the name of Taunton's College. And of course, Benny Hill's Garden had to be here because this was what Taunton's had become.
Many local people have researched the history of Benny's life. Malcolm Dale is from the Eastleigh Historical Society.
He got himself more or less established with a job at Woolworths in Eastleigh as a stockroom assistant, but it also involved cleaning the floor of the shop and oiling it. And he wasn't very keen on that. He wasn't happy at all there, and the staff, who were mostly females, were very sympathetic and realised that he was not in the right sort of job. So one day, one of the ladies told him that an Ivy Lillywhite, who lived in Dutton Lane, not far away, actually ran a musical group called Ivy Lillywhite and Friends. And she entertained people in the town hall with music for dancers, etc. And there was room for a little bit of other light entertainment as well. So he went to see Ivy Lillywhite, And she asked him to do the various things he could, the turns and sing and play the guitar, which he'd learnt by then. And so she became his guardian, if you like, and also his mentor, and filtered out the best that he could produce. And from that point on, really, he didn't look back. The only problem was, of course, there was a war on. But there was a bit of gold in that war because, of course, a lot of people were being called up, which meant that his abilities were going to be called upon. So he did make most of his time with Ivy Lillywhite, but eventually he thought, now's my chance. And he got on a train. He terminated his employment with them, what was Hans Dairy, having been a milkman after a little while at Woolworths. And he jumped on a train and he went up to London, on spec, literally on spec. He didn't worry about where to sleep at night because a lot of people in London were, by that time, sleeping on the underground stations because of the Blitz. So he thought, yeah, well, they can do it, I can do it. So that's what he did. So he used that as his basis, and then he went round all the theatres in London looking for work. And at that time, not long after that, he bumped into Reg Barney, who became a lifelong friend.
From the very beginning of his time in show business, Benny worked with many people who also became household names. Actor and presenter Nicholas Parsons remembers their time together.
I worked with him first at the Nuffield Centre, which was just after the war. And they used to have a show. This was the old Nuffield Centre where they used to, during the war, the forces were entertained free. And then they used to do these programmes from the Nuffield Centre, which Benny compared, and it was for the new acts of television. And that was my very first solo spot I ever did. But Benny was the link between them. And Benny used to write all his own material, and he was a wonderful compere, kept the thing moving, because it was live, remember, and you had to watch the times and everything.
He was a brilliant mimic, I remember, in the old BBC days. The names of the day, like Philip Harben, the chef and everything, I've forgotten now, but... and, of course, playing all the characters.
Barry Cryer. Benny went on to have tremendous appeal across practically every country in the world. Here's another clip from 1991.
I don't think there's a great deal of difference between humour all over the world, quite honestly. I mean, we watch Jacques Tati, and when he does Monsieur Hulot, we think it's very funny. Comedy's universal. I believe in China the difference is there are, I understand, not mother-in-law gags, they're all son-in-law gags.
Are they?
He was like the Keystone Cops. He wrote everything himself, as Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, all of them did. He would admit that he borrowed a bit from here and a bit from there. But he wove it so beautifully that it was Ben's, you know. And I always say when people say, he used to pinch from the Keystone Cops, I said, yes, but who did they pinch from? There must have been somewhere it started. Probably in old vaudeville years ago.
Actress Bella Emberg speaking during the mid-1990s. Bella worked with Benny on many programmes. I managed to track her down, and she very kindly spoke to me from the set of one of her latest projects.
The first time I met him, he was doing the very last show for the BBC, and we were filming at Ealing. And Rita Webb wasn't free, and I stepped in, thank goodness. And that's the first time that he met little Jackie Wright. You know, the one with the bald head?
I do, yes.
We were on the same show together. We came from the same agency, and they clicked. You could see it, and it was wonderful. And then Benny went on to Thames Television, and Jackie went with him. I didn't follow for some years afterwards, but, you know, to see those two click, it was quite something. He was a very shy man. I wasn't in the inner sanctum, but I always, kept out a bit. I've always done this, and the stars don't get too bored with you always being around them too much. I found him very kind, very quiet, an absolute genius. I worked with two geniuses in my life. One was Mel Brooks, and the other one was Benny Hill. Ben was a genius. He did it all. I mean, he wrote... He, to my mind, directed. I was near him quite often because I wanted to do camera work when I was young, but they wouldn't allow women to do it in my days. I wanted to be an actress-director, but they wouldn't allow it. And I used to listen to him talking to the directors, Dennis, about what he wanted, and it was so interesting. I learned so much from him.
Tell me about your actual work with Benny then. What characters did you portray? What did you do with him?
Usually dragons and harrigans and ugly ladies, but I didn't mind. He was like Russ Abbott. He never poked fun at me, but it was there. I always remember, I've still got it. It was a little, very quick sketch of people standing at a bus stop doing various things. And I had a man like a fox thing draped around my shoulders, and it had on it a man of their own. And I've still got it.
Over the years, Benny created many wacky and wonderful characters for his television shows, a tradition that, according to Malcolm Dale, started in Hampshire.
Well, I think a lot of them began when he was at Eastleigh. He certainly started to organise the props that he was going to need for the future when he was there, and he had ideas obviously well ahead of when he became totally popular. And he used to visit the local crop clothing store, and much to the amazement of the manager, he used to ask for clothes in his size of people like Vickers and other people that would have looked a bit garish to say walking about, because he had no idea that Benny was actually in the entertainment industry. So he was a little bit gobsmacked, to say the least.
Hill's Angels happened really because of Kenny Everett. Kenny Everett was being interviewed one day, and his ratings I would say suddenly, but were very high. And I thought, how come his ratings are so high? And he said in the press, thank God for hot gossip. So there again, I thought, well, we'll have some of that. And I looked around and we found some nice ladies, and we thought, what can we call them? So we thought Hill's Angels. Yeah, that's a nice name, Hill's. So that's how they came about.
Benny featured many actresses in his shows, something that some people too easily labelled as sexist. Gary Bushell is one of the many people that quickly dismissed these claims.
If you watch a Benny Hill programme, the men are the targets. Benny might start by chasing the women, but at the end of every chase, the women were chasing him. It was the men who were inadequate, the men who walked into lampposts, the little bald man who got slapped. Women always ended up on top in Benny Hill shows. And the other irony is, of course, that women in Benny Hill shows fared a lot better than Carol Cleveland did in Monty Python. Carol was always brought on as a bit of eye candy, wearing something skimpy, and yet no one turns around and says, well, that Monty Python, they were sexist.
Even just now, you describing it brings a smile to my face.
Oh, yeah, I think it was there's an innocence about it. It was marinated in that British seaside humour, the postcard double entendres. We loved. We grew up loving. It was just part of our tradition, really.
You're so right, though, aren't you? People are very short-sighted when they say, "Oh, Benny Hill, dirty old man," when it was him being chased by the women.
It was always Benny. And I think the other weird thing, of course, is that women have a much rawer deal in comedy now on television. I mean, you got the Little Britain guys turning them into vomiting, incontinent old hags, and Mitchell and Webb in one of their earlier series were terribly violent against women and shooting them and smacking them in the mouth and things like that. And you think, well, hold on a minute, that's sexism. That's vile. Not what Benny was doing.
For example, a very pretty girl walks down the street. A man on the other side of the road says, oh, she's nice, into a lamppost. He's the one who's hurt. He's the one who loses his dignity. She just walks straight on.
Mary Knight from Shirley in Southampton has long been a big fan of Benny and his style of comedy.
He wrote his own scripts. He had the ideas and the ability, which just had everybody full of mirth and happiness and laughter, and it was marvellous that he was prepared to come to us.
As we heard earlier, Mary met Benny through her late husband Norman, a friendship that wasn't forgotten by Benny, who visited them again during the early 90s.
Well, he came about 10 in the morning, having telephoned previously to say would it be convenient for him to come and see his old friend Norman, whom he'd known and remembered and been great friends since the age of 8. He came to the house and stayed, and we reminisced and had so much fun, discussed so many subjects which were nothing to do with television or his popularity or was just a stage. It was just humour and his views on life and death and everything. He just sort of poured out his heart. He felt at ease with us, which was so nice, and he wanted to make up for the lost years when we hadn't been in touch. we didn't think he would want to know us, but in fact he did. And he just was so sorry that Norman had multiple sclerosis, and he wanted to push him in the wheelchair and take him and have this lovely meal and meet one of his friends and make up for the time that sadly was running out. Benny asked us whether we had seen the tragic television last performance of Tommy when he collapsed on the stage, because Benny was couldn't believe that it could happen so instantly, and Tommy would be no more. And that friendship was, of course, at an end, but little knowing that Benny himself would just have 3 months left to live. It was just incredible to watch him walk down the road afterwards, and, well, thinking then that we would be going together with one of Benny's friends, who in fact I was at school with, though I didn't know her at the time. She was in a different part of the college to myself. But when we discovered latterly that after Benny's death that she and I were at the same college, and it would have been the perfect foursome, because she and I became friends through Benny, and because of Norman's friendship with Benny, it was very wonderful. He was going to take us to the Hilton, and I said, well, of course, Norman is in a wheelchair because of his multiple sclerosis. And no, he said, I'm used to pushing a wheelchair. I've got 2 lady fans that I keep in touch with. They wrote to him for many years, and he went to see them, and he would push the wheelchairs very happily, and he wanted to push Norman and treat us to a nice meal at the Hilton, because of Norman's disability we couldn't get out to have meals and get around very much, but Benny was prepared to be in charge and to be reunited with us and catch up and get to know us again, which was totally incredible, and we're very flattered to think that he wanted to. I remember hearing on the radio that Benny had died, and I knew it was going to be difficult to tell Norman the sad news. But we've got our memories, and we're very thankful for them, to have known him and been friends of his, and he was such a wonderfully talented, marvellous person.
On the 19th of April 1992, the world of comedy and show business suffered a great loss.
News of Benny Hill's death, so soon after that of Frankie Howard, has saddened colleagues like Ernie Wise, who relished his deliberate naughtiness.
This is cheeky humour. I mean, and he was our most successful comedian. I don't think anybody has been more successful than Benny Hill. I liked his visual humour. He had the most original visual comedy, and I think that was his outstanding talent. He was really a Chaplinish sort of clown.
A genius for writing, for observing. He went everywhere armed with notebooks to record his observations of people's behaviour. And I think he combined that comic genius of his own.
Richard Dunn from Thames Television. Bella Emberg, who worked closely with Benny for many years, remembers the time she heard the tragic news.
I went to see Leslie Joseph in a play at Wimbledon, and it had been on that Frankie Howard just passed away, and we said it was very tragic and everything, you know. I met Leslie in the bar and had a drink, and we came home, and I came upstairs to my study, and I switched on my television. I do a lot of C-faxing, and suddenly it was there, Benny Hill dead, and I said to a friend of mine, I said, quick, come upstairs, tell me I'm not reading what I'm reading. And she came upstairs, she said, yes, I'm sorry, you are. And then I knew he'd gone.
Benny Hill chose to be buried beside his parents at Southampton's Hollybrook Cemetery, less than 2 miles from his birthplace and from the family home in Westrow Gardens. More than 80 mourners filed into the chapel for a short service. They included family and friends from the world of show business. Benny Hill's family had asked for a quiet funeral, There'll be a memorial service in London later in the year, which is expected to reflect the comedian's worldwide fame. In the last 20 years, he'd become the world's most successful comic. But this afternoon, it was the people of his home city who wanted to pay tribute.
He was really a great man. Come from nothing up to something, didn't he? We're very proud of him.
Benny Hill was great. He was a great comic. It's part of our history in Southampton. Sort of thing. It'd be a great loss to lose such a good man.
Why do you think he was so good?
He was just funny. He was just so fun. He was such a nice man. He was just so funny.
Yes, he was very well liked, and he used to walk around the city, however, and shop in Bedford Place. People used to meet him in Shirley, you know. So he was really very well known.
Well, I decided to come along to pay my respects to someone who is our own, which is Benny. I mean, he's one of us.
His neighbours, too, had come to pay their respects. They often saw Benny Hill in his back garden, writing scripts.
We were all very fond of him. We didn't see much of him, but we were very fond of him, weren't we?
Yes, we were.
We were very proud that he was our neighbour, you see.
As the mourners moved from the chapel to the Hill family grave, the rain and hail began.
When you go, which will be many years from now, they'll look back and they'll say, oh yes, it's Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, Benny Hill, and you'll be lumped in with those great silent comedians because of that universal...
I feel I'm the Van Gogh of comics. 100 years from now, they'll say, hey, I've got a tape of Benny, you haven't. And they'll be going for millions of pounds, you know, the cassettes.
Do you think so?
Well,
they already are.
Yes, well, the only thing is, of course, you know, that thank God, you know, I won't die quite as poor as poor old Van Gogh did, you know. He didn't make a penny, did he? Everything.
No,
he had money of his work.
Benny speaking just the year before his death to the then Radio 1's Steve Wright. 1992 was a year that would bring yet more sad news. Months after Benny was buried, vandals desecrated his grave.
Good evening and welcome to South Today. In the news tonight, the grave of Southampton-born comedian Benny Hill has been desecrated by vandals who may have believed that a quantity of jewels were buried with him.
The rumour was that he'd been buried with his rings and things, which I don't think were true. But luckily, it's sealed down now, and you wouldn't know where it was unless you know where it is, if you know what I mean. Which is a great shame, because the world should see where he's buried, because he was such a great man.
Southampton owes Benny so much that there should be some memorial that people can remember Benny because of his talent and the person that he was. It's been a long time and very much overdue that we hopefully will be able to remember Benny and what he achieved during his lifetime, because he deserves it and he must not be forgotten.
A plaque has been positioned in Eastleigh.
A Benny Hill lookalike performed the famous song at today's ceremony. The comedian had one of his first jobs at Hans Dairy in Eastleigh. The plaque was put up by the town's local history society. Benny achieved worldwide fame before his death in 1992, and repeats of his shows are still popular.
He was a shy person and he kept himself to himself. He was a private person. Yes, we all loved him. He was great and he died too soon.
And many of Benny's friends say it's amazing that 7 years after his death, he can still draw a big crowd.
Malcolm Dale from the Eastleigh Historical Society was responsible for the plaque.
The plaque was, although it's my idea, a lot of the help came from the people in Eastleigh, including Gordon Cox of the Eastleigh District Local History Society, and the town centre manager also backed it and assisted with some of the items which went towards the event. So, yes, I can't take total credit for the plaque itself, but the idea certainly gained ground with a number of people in the area, and including the Mayor of Eastleigh, Jane Welsh, who quite happily came along and unveiled it for us. So, no, I think the day went off so well that it was unbelievable, and we had a good crowd of people came in, turned up for it, and they all cheered, and they came obviously another look at all the various display items which had been set up. So I was more than pleased about the outcome.
I was sort of vaguely aware that there was this international angle on Benny. And then when I was looking at his story recently, to discover that, Michael Jackson was a great fan of Benny's and actually visited him in hospital when he was ill, there's that link. And obviously this week as well, at the time we're making this interview, Michael recently died, and, there's the link with Benny again. There's a sort of quite poignant, really.
Headmistress of Taunton School, Alice Wrighton, speaking to me earlier this year in the Benny Hill Memorial Garden.
There's some lovely roses. The garden was originally planted with roses back in the early 90s when it was set up. We've just recently done some restoration of it because obviously, things happen to roses, and we wanted to liven it up. So we've done some work on it, and it's a lovely sort of semicircular formal rose garden just outside the front of the south-facing front of the college, which is rather splendid. And there are 3 nice benches which we, students can drape themselves over in the summer if they choose to. It's very nice. There's a lovely brick paved area as well. It's something we're proud of.
And is it one of those gardens where you're entertaining people in your office and you say, well, it's a rather nice day, let's have this conversation in the Benny Hill?
Well, I have to say, we've recently had this lovely upturn in the weather, so that's certainly something that over the summer months I would do. But this is my first summer, you see, at Taunton, so you give me an idea there, Richard.
Yes, spend it in the garden.
He had this, and still has, this incredible following throughout the world. His shows are still shown in nearly every country in the world. I mean, I was getting little repeat fees coming in from, Afghanistan and Zimbabwe and Sri Lanka and, the Lebanon and all kinds of places, because he goes everywhere.
Nicholas Parsons talking about the worldwide appeal of Benny's programmes, a view echoed by television executives around the globe, including American TV controller Michael Hill.
I think that Benny Hill was one of America's guilty pleasures. We have bawdiness of it. He certainly was not politically correct, but he did, though, really strike a chord among a lot of viewers.
Elizabeth Berriere works for a TV station based in France who still repeat Benny's shows.
For us, the French people, he's like Charlie Chaplin, but on television. At the same time, he can be like a father, a brother, a lover, or a man, just a man. And he is very funny, even when he is sometimes a bit vulgar. He knows when he must stop.
Even his co-stars are still amazed by the ongoing popularity of his programmes. Bella Emberg thinks she knows why they have such a strong appeal.
Because it was like Laurel and Hardy's work, which I belong to their Appreciation Society. It's universal, it's mime, it's simple. I mean, I was on holiday in Malta once, and I went into a little store there, and they were all watching Benny Hill dubbed. And, they were laughing, and they didn't want to search, they wanted to watch the show.
It seems wherever you are in the world, someone nearby will know and love Benny Hill. There is one character, though, that is perhaps his most popular, a character that has its roots here, in Eastleigh.
He was put in charge of a horse and cart with all the bits and pieces on board. You name it, everything. And, of course, at that time, the people relied on the milkman to provide them not only with milk, but with eggs, butter, all the bits and pieces that we take for granted when we go for a supermarket today. That milkman had to supply on a daily basis because there was no fridges. So that's another point you've got to bear in mind. It was a needed, a required thing in those times. So his round he took on, bearing his age, which was about 16 and a half, stretched from... Well, he went up from Eastleigh through High Street, I think, up to Lee Road, and then over the railway bridge and down across to Bishopstoke, and that's where his round started, as far as I'm aware. Then he went through the bottom end of Bishopstoke, along Hamilton Road, and then back into Bishopstoke Road, across to Fair Oak, and into Fair Oak Square. And that was quite a lot of houses. There's a lot of houses to deliver to. And so it wasn't, he was absolutely shattered by the time he got back to the depot. And don't forget, his duties didn't stop there. He had to clean the horse, he had to unload all the empty crates and bottles. There was nobody else to do it. You've got to bear in mind, this is wartime. All the able-bodied people were called up. You only had the older people, very old people that weren't. left, and a lot of those couldn't do their heavy work, so he had his time cut out. And bearing in mind there was rationing on, and the people were watching everybody like a hawk, especially milkmen, and make sure they didn't favour anybody. He had to be very, very thoughtful about his deliveries and not try to offer anybody a little bit more than they should have. So so it was one of those. He had to be very, very diplomatic, I should think, on occasions. So, but he was well liked, and I did come across a couple of people at the plaque unveiling ceremony who remembered him as a milkman, and they said he was always very popular, and they're always welcome, obviously, during that time. Because don't forget, a lot of people, especially during the early part of the war, were not allowed to move around very much, and a lot of people could only stay in their, or go for a very short distance away from their home. They weren't allowed to, or encouraged to go very far. So that sort of gentleman, you obviously gave him all the latest news as well from the area. You know, he would have been well sought after as far as information was concerned.
So much of what Benny did was wonderful, but for me, what always makes me smile, just to hear it mentioned, not even having to hear the song, but Ernie, the fastest milkman in the West, it was just the way it cantered along, the inbuilt joy that came with it, the great word play. She said, I'd like it pasteurised, because pasteurised is best. She said, Ernie, I'd be happy if it comes up to my chest. You just think these are just wonderful lines. And he honed it, he polished it, he made it perfect, and there was not a wasted word in it. That's why I love that song, and that's why when I think of Benny Hill, I think of that. ITV, in my opinion, should just show 15 minutes of Benny Hill every night up against EastEnders and see what sort of audience they get, because I think we so need a smile these days. I think they'd be surprised at the response.
After the show, Lola and I said we'd go around the stage door to see him come out. Well, me and about 500 other people were waiting for him. And he came out, and it parted like the Red Sea so he could walk out. And he was all alone, had nobody with him. He walked out, and he turned around and said, good night. And he walked down Middle Street, and I just wanted to run after him and hug him, because I thought, you look so lonely and you're so loved. And I never dreamed years later I'd be working with him. And I never told him, because he may have thought I was screwy. I've got a caravan in Bracklesham Bay, and I'm a great cricket fan, and I go to Hampshire and I go to Hove to watch the cricket. And I always go down and see Ben at least once a year and have a chat to him.
Thank you, Benny, for the wonderful person that you are and your friendship through the years. We've always followed your career with interest, and we didn't imagine that you would want to come and see us, because we were sort of nobodies. But because of the association through the years, he hadn't forgotten, and he just wanted to come and talk to people who weren't in show business, that he could feel at ease with. And he and Norman could remember all the events of their school days and talking about everything in general. And he was coming back because he said he enjoyed our company, and he would take us out to the Hilton, and it would be the beginning of a lasting association, that every time he came to Southampton he would make a point of meeting us again, and that was very flattering, and we appreciated it very much. And the fact that his death was so unexpected 3 months later, we just felt so emotional about it, and were privileged to remember him with so much love. And he did make the world a happier place through laughter, because I wrote that on his wreath. Thank you, Benny. Thank you for your friendship, and we admired and loved you so much.
Thank you so much to all the contributors that have made this celebration programme possible, and to the estate of Benny Hill for permission to use clips from the archive. You've been listening to The South Salutes Benny Hill.
What was the classic line that got the biggest laugh?
Oh, I think that was I don't know whether we can do this.
Oh, you can do anything on this show.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Well, I think it was when Henry McGee said to me, are you any happier as a Chinaman than we people, Britishers, are? And I said, let me ask you a question. For your information, let me ask you a question. When was the last time you had an election?
Yes.
And he sat there for 20 seconds and he said, I said, yeah. He said, you mean a general election? I said, yeah, of course. You don't think I meant a council election?